Hey folks, we are going to spend some time talking about relevant detail, and a major subset of relevant detail is images. So many people have been called on to write something like a narrative essay, right? And in high school, we all hear this adage, show, don't tell. Right? Show, don't tell. And when we hear this, we tend to think of showing people things, right? Creating an image. The first thing that we think of when we hear the word image is a picture. So we tend to really lean into visual images, right? If somebody asked me to describe my office, I would probably talk about maybe like this picture that I have over here, or my penchant for coffee, or my Casablanca poster, right? And we often talk about describing a room from like left to right or top to bottom or etc. And so when folks write narrative essays, we really tend to lean into visual descriptors. In fact, one time I had a student who was writing about really a challenging piece of news that he got. So he was talking about how, he came downstairs and he found his parents on the couch, and, they looked kind of sad, and they were sort of huddled together in the middle of the couch. They were having trouble making eye contact with him, and then they gave him really challenging news. The problem with this was that the student had been assigned to write a narrative essay about a significant time in his life. And when we hear that word narrative, we're like, okay, well, we need to describe things. And so before we got to seeing the parents on the couch, we came down the staircase, and basically we get a visual description of the entire living room from left to right. So I heard about what the curtains looked like, what color they were, what period of the 1960s, 1970s they came from, so they were plaid, and how big the squares in the plaid were. I heard about the color of the carpet, how the state of the plants in the room, which ones were alive, which ones were dead, which windows were able to be seen through the curtains, which ones were not. I heard about scuffs on the table and dust here and there, and how many bookshelves were in the room, and all kinds of things like that, clothing that had been left out maybe the night before, that kind of thing, what color the couch was, what state of plaid that was, how worn the cushions were. And then once we got to the couch, then we saw the parents, and then we saw them preparing to give this news. Now, none of these details about the living room came into the rest of the essay. In fact, we completely left the living room behind, and then we moved to the character, or the individual processing this news, going outside, sitting down on the step, and really kind of working through this situation. This is the kind of thing that tends to happen when we're writing anything narrative or that requires detail or description, because again, we hear describe, we think of images, and we go straight to the visuals. So I want to remind you, as a writer, and as somebody who's probably going to have to write more than just narrative essays, right? We're going to have to write a lot of things like responses, things like analysis pieces, things like research essays, things like that. And so it's really essential to understand what is necessary to describe, what's going to be relevant to your reader and to their experience, and also to what you're writing. Okay, so yes, as writers and as people in the world, we understand visual images, okay, things that we can see. This is the sense of sight. But remember that all of your senses are available to describe, to help people come to an understanding of what it is that you're seeing or experience or talking about. Okay, so in addition to sight images, we have the opportunity to have aural images. These are things that we can hear. So maybe if you're in a situation where you're describing, kayaking down a river, we're not just going to describe what the river looks like. We're going to describe the sound of the water moving, or the wind in the trees, or a bird that calls, or the sound of the water moving past the kayak. Okay. We also have the opportunity for gustatory images. That's such a great word, isn't it? Gustatory is taste. So if we are eating something, or if we're in a situation where Like there's a really strong smell. Have you ever been in a place where a smell is so thick that you can taste it? Like maybe you get into a car, maybe like your family was supposed to rent a non-smoking car and you get in and the car has been previously rented by people who smoke. And if you're not used to that, that smell is very strong, it's overpowering, and sometimes you can actually taste the tang of the tar. That was some nifty alliteration, in the car. Maybe you've been in, say, a really dirty house and there's that sort of sharpness that can linger on your taste buds, as well as being something that you can smell, okay? However, it doesn't have to be negative, right? These have been some kind of negative examples. Think about like if you've ever gone to, say, your grandma's house or your aunt's house or even your parents' house, right? And you walk up and you open the door and you can tell that folks have been cooking or baking, right? My grandma, I liked meatloaf when I was a kid, and my grandma would sometimes make meatloaf, and because I liked it, it was a delicious smell to me. So I'd get to her house and I'd push the door open and there would be sort of that warm humidity in the air, right? Not like super humid, but just enough to tell that somebody's been cooking and frying and that kind of thing. And there would be that smell of, you know, like onion and bacon and beef that's cooking in the oven. And that smell is so like slightly sweet, because there's barbecue sauce, right? And it's just enough that you can both smell and taste it. But I also mentioned that sort of warm humidity when you open the door, right? That sort of thickness to the air. That's a tactile sense. This is our sense of touch. So this is what we can feel on our skin when we're moving, right? Or when we're just in a place, or maybe it's describing what something feels like. Let's say you're holding a strawberry in your hand, right? If you run your hands over it, it feels sort of like dimply, almost like a golf ball. But there's also that slight roughness because of those seeds that are sitting on the dimples on the outside, but it's also kind of smooth, a little bit rubbery, right? All of these are tactile senses. And all of these can help the reader make a connection to what you experienced in the moment, okay? The thing with images, the thing with any of these types of details, your goal as a writer, especially if you're writing something narrative, right? But overall, your goal as a writer is to share an experience with a reader. This isn't just share as in tell them about it. This is share as in help them experience it. That's your goal, is to get them into the same physical state, the same mental state, and the same understanding that you had as the individual who was having that experience. So the more information you can show them, right, make them able to actually experience for themselves, the better. So even if somebody hasn't been in the exact circumstance of being in a kayak on a river, to borrow a cliche, maybe we're coming up on a waterfall, right? Maybe they haven't been in that exact state of urgency, but they've probably been in a place where they have smelled or felt cool water, right? Maybe they've been in a boat, and maybe they have heard the same sounds of the bird that you are describing, or maybe they have had river water splashed into their mouth and it's got that slight kind of greenish algae flavor to it. Some of you guys will know what I'm talking about, some of you won't. They've probably smelled maybe something like riverweed, or even if they've been to the ocean, right? They've probably smelled something like kelp or some kind of reeds, right? That sort of damp, greenish, algae tinted scent. Maybe they've felt something slimy, or it's been a hot day and they plunge their hand into cool water, or that cool water splashes on them. That feeling is something that your reader can connect to and understand. And then there's one more sense. There's sort of a sixth sense. I'm not talking about ghosts that we can get in here. And this is the kinesthetic sense. Okay, the kinesthetic sense. This is some people spell it without the A. I think with the A, it's sort of a British sense. But this is, it's a little harder to describe, okay? But this is sort of an internal feeling. I'm not talking about emotions, okay? I'm talking about something like if you have siblings or, you know, friends, and you've sat and watched a scary movie with them. And then after the movie, you get up and you walk away, and one of them decides to jump out of somewhere dark and scare the absolute living daylights out of you. Okay? When this happens, there's a physical reaction in your body. It's almost like an electric shock, like a physical jolt. Okay? It's like a muscle sort of feeling that you can describe. And like I just described it to you, you've probably felt something like that. Okay, so if you are in a kayak on a river and you're coming up on a waterfall, you're probably going to feel a physical sense of dread. And what I mean by that is your arms might go cold. They might start to feel sort of weak. Maybe you're going to have a sort of pins and needles, like an icy pins and needles sensation in them. People talk about like their heart in their throat because you can feel that pounding sensation in this vein right here. That's a kinesthetic sense. People talk about butterflies in their stomach, that sort of like feeling of something taking off and fluttering around in there. That's a kinesthetic sense. I had a student one time who was very anxious about something, and he said, he wrote in his essay that he walked around all day feeling like an overinflated balloon, right? Where you've taken in, like you feel like you can't breathe and you've got all this air in your lungs, but it feels like it's not doing anything, and we keep feeling like we're trying to take in more air, okay? Some folks have talked about, you know, a fearful situation, like seeing a car in the ditch that looks like it belongs to a family member, and they feel like a metal disc is sort of sitting on their tongue and it turns over in their mouth, so this metallic taste just sort of crosses from one side of their mouth to the other, like the sun going across the sky, but much less pleasant, okay? That's a kinesthetic sense. In the essay that I opened this discussion with, the young man who described his living room, when he went outside and sat down, he said that his stomach felt like it was full of TV static. That's a beautiful kinesthetic descriptor of what it feels like to be in that moment, okay? So when you're writing about anything, you have the opportunity not just to tell the reader what things look like, but to put them physically in the moment by selecting images that will help them sit basically in your skin, right? The biggest goal is to get the reader in your skin and to understand how you literally feel, right? And to understand what it feels like to be in your body and to experience the same things that you experienced in that moment. Now, like the discussion that we opened the video with explaining the living room, we can go too far with this, okay? But the most important takeaway here is that we need to show the reader, not tell the reader what things were like in that moment. From there, we can determine what is relevant detail. So in another video, we're going to talk about how to figure out what is relevant detail and what's just detail. But for now, if you're working on a narrative essay, start drafting some images, right? Think about a specific particular moment and demonstrate to the reader what it was like to be in your skin at that moment, how it felt, how it sounded, how it looked, what you could smell, what you could touch, right? What seems to be most important to describe in that moment. That's going to be so much more effective than using emotional words like I was terrified, or I was excited, or I was worried, or I was, elated to find something. Instead, let them see it for themselves and therefore experience it for themselves. Good luck with your writing.